Some stories age like fine wine. We've quoted Icarus and his starry-eyed attempt to reach the burning sun. We've fallen hard for the charming and shy Mr. Darcy just as much as Elizabeth Bennet did. We've even felt how soul-crushing love can be as reality set in for Hazel and Augustus. These are stories that go above and beyond to illustrate to us what the world is like. The good, the bad, and the mundane. And then there's the Harry Potter series, whose author and various subtle plot points age like milk. I'm sure that everyone's familiar with the Harry Potter series somehow. To put it simply, we follow the life of Harry Potter, a young orphan who's prophesied to defeat a big bad villain as he makes friends and learns heartfelt lessons along the way. Despite this basic formula, coupled with numerous yet subtle racist and ignorant plot devices, Harry Potter still manages to be the highest-selling book series of all time. At least 500 million copies have been sold worldwide, and its franchise quickly developed a successful movie series, spin-offs, and even a theme park in various countries. Unfortunately, J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, has made transphobic tweets wherein she completely believes that trans women aren't women, and that their mere existence is a threat to womanhood itself. No one expected that Rowling would be so openly transphobic. Out of the millions of fans who have consumed her work, many were heartbroken and rightfully angry at her stubborn ignorance. Her big and diverse audience, filled with kids and adults of different racial and sexual backgrounds, were directly impacted as Rowling condescendingly spoke her truth. Most of her loving fans were deeply hurt more than any written magic could repair. The more proudly she spread her hate, the more I felt my heart shatter into tiny pieces. As I read her books, I remembered being so in love with the universe that she created. It was really beautiful and bright at the time. It almost felt like the world would always right itself whenever I turned a page. And yet, somehow, her nauseating ideology was enough to make a world of magic just as dirty as the world that we live in right now. And yet, was this deep-rooted hatred really so surprising? Or did her famous Harry Potter series show little tidbits of her bigotry between the lines? When I first read through her books as a child, I was mesmerized. I was so distracted by the magic that some of the smaller issues never stood out to me. Issues such as racism or the lack of diversity simply flew over my head. Take, for example, the goblins who manage Gringotts Bank. Many comments regarding their physical appearances have been made. In the first book, they were described as short and fair-skinned, as they spent very little time outside. They were described also as having very long fingers and feet, dome-shaped heads, pointed noses and pointed ears, and some with bald heads or receding hairlines. These descriptions are actually very similar to the anti-Semitic stereotypes that have arisen throughout the centuries. Anti-Semitism is defined as a hostile prejudice against Jewish people. Schrank in 2007 wrote that the importance of the Jewish nose is that it's perceived as one of the most obvious defining features of a Jew. Additionally, as discussed by Arkell in 2009, the non-Jew perception of Jewish people has been distorted so that they view them as a homogeneous group that only fits a single role that can satisfy their narrative. Because it's convenient, they have been regarded through history as people who are owners of ill-gotten wealth, exploit human behavior, and practice unusual cultures as well as follow odd laws that are unintelligible to most. Whether consciously or not, Rowling wrote characters that heavily resembled these old Jewish stereotypes. In a fantasy setting with no real boundaries, choosing to have these caricatures become the Wizarding World's bankers and money handlers is quite tone-deaf. Even in the novels, the goblins were considered inferior and had to fight for their rights against the wizards. They were jewelers and bankers and thoroughly disagreeable. For a children's series, allowing these subtle yet equally harmful instances of stereotyping should not go unchecked. Wheeler et al. In 2000 wrote that for the stereotype target, however, there is a clear harm. The target does not enjoy any cognitive efficiency afforded by the stereotype application, but must pay the costs associated with the stereotype inaccuracy. These costs include stereotype-based discrimination and the elicitation of self-fulfilling prophecies. Another example of her bigotry can be seen in the diversity of her characters, or lack thereof. J.K. Rowling revealed in a tweet that Dumbledore, one of the most prominent characters in the Harry Potter series, was actually gay. Many queer fans were overjoyed by the news and have enthusiastically begged Rowling for more content depicting Dumbledore as such. However, this was never hinted at, indicated, or even talked about anywhere else besides Twitter. The recent books, shows, and movies could have been used to show or even canonically confirm his sexuality, but it was never done despite Dumbledore being a main character in these new media. Other than her flimsy attempt at making Dumbledore gay, no other character was given a sexuality or gender that was queer. Although Rowling considers herself to be an ally to the community, she does not put any actual work into putting more sexually diverse characters into her series. Queer people should not be tokenized. They are real people with real struggles who are directly hurt by the indifference that she shows towards them. Her insertion of Dumbledore's sexuality is not representation. It's a ploy to stay relevant by the community that granted her fame. Beyond that, Rowling has had a problem with writing characters of color. Hermione Granger was revealed as black by Rowling in another tweet. Being black or any other ethnicity is more than just the color of your skin. This fact is important when looking at racial diversity in media. It's important to bring up the cultural aspects of a character's background to normalize their cultures. In this context, we should look for how they grew up, how they process their environment, or how they respond to different situations. Hermione was not written to have any black experiences at all. The closest black identifier we have would have been her wild hair. Children of color seeing themselves positively in media is important for the development of their self-image. Although the lack of representation may not be intentionally harmful or sinister, the effect of having mostly white characters in children's books should not be taken lightly, as said by Hurley in 2005. Other smaller details can show how her ignorance affects her writing. Firstly, J.K. Rowling wrote in a recent article on Pottermore about the history of Harry Potter series' Native American magic. She specifically grabbed the legend of the Skinwalkers and molded it to fit into her world. The way she did it angered several Native communities, according to an article by The Guardian. They said that she was, and I quote, straight up appropriating their culture, and that they found her method of writing to be very disrespectful to them. Secondly, Cho Chang's name is just a mashup of two surnames, with Cho being a Korean surname and Chang being a Chinese surname. To put some context, this would be like a Filipino character being named Juan Bautista for some reason. Voldemort's name is an anagram and French for flight from death. If she could put so much thought into another character's name, why not in Cho Chang's? Lastly, the concept of happy slaves is strangely overlooked in her series. The happy slaves, or house elves, are important to the Harry Potter series. However, their role beyond helping the main character is quite disturbing. Happy slaves is a portrayal of slaves who are content with a horrific role to enforce the idea that their slavery is okay. We see this trait in the house elves because they, and I quote, enjoy their work. However, this is not always the case. Even if some house elves were loved, many were still abused and mistreated. For example, the Black family, or a family from the Harry Potter series, would often behead their own house elves and mount them on their walls. Often, their enjoyment can be traced to coercion, brainwashing, and cultural expectation. None of the characters seem to even care about this. Hermione Granger is the only character who thought it was wrong, and yet she was frequently ignored and brushed off, and ridiculed, and there was no final discussion about their story. The Harry Potter series is a famous worldwide spectacle that has touched the hearts of people from different ages and backgrounds. The black tar of ignorance that seeped through her work can similarly make its way to the minds of the readers who consume it. The influence of a well-loved novel has on minds cannot be underestimated. The normalization of off-handed instances of bigotry and ignorance is harmful for those being victimized, adults and children alike. Jewish people are, once again, victims of stereotyping. The LGBTQ+ community has been tokenized, and people of color are still begging for scraps of representation. And yet, the damage is done. All we can do now is to stop supporting J.K. Rowling, deplatform her so that she no longer has an audience that will listen to her beliefs. Stop buying the books. Stop paying for her movies. Stop going to theme parks and stop enjoying the merchandise. Stop supporting her, because if you support someone who wholeheartedly advocates for transphobia and tokenistic characterizations, then what does that say about you? The microaggressions and ignorance show how flawed the Harry Potter series is. It's not perfect, and perhaps this is largely due to how imperfect the author is. The best way that we can move on, and to move forward, is to do what J.K. Rowling did with Dumbledore's sexuality. Pretend it never happened and move on. Thanks for listening to my speech. I hope you enjoyed.